Okay, this is something that I've wanted to speak about for a while, and it's something that exists both in the boxing and MMA fight communities slash fan bases. So, if you follow both sports, you'll kind of notice a trend when it comes to fight week, or even when you see fighter interviews, and that specific trend is that everybody becomes psychologists, body language experts. They read people. You see a fighter twitching, and that means they're scared. You see a fighter not blinking, and that means they're so confident. You see so many of these, and I saw this to another level this weekend. Or not this weekend. I mean, this weekend was the fight, but this past week with Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira. Now, everybody looked at the interviews, the press conference from Israel Adesanya, and the amount of people that were like, oh, he looks so scared, he looks so nervous, he's not himself, he's out of his game. What happened in the fight? Israel Adesanya knocked this man cold in the second round. Now, I think this is an issue that has plagued the MMA community for a long time, and it always will, because people love to overanalyze everything. And when I mean everything, I mean everything. There is so much. A fighter could do anything, and it's overanalyzed. You want to look at Israel Adesanya. He's a very confident guy. He always has been a confident guy. But I remember, if we go back all the way to Robert Whittaker would say something to Adesanya, and Adesanya maybe respond a little bit like he's snapping at him a bit. And people talk about how he's so scared and how Whittaker's in his head. And this is something that's always on with fans. They always feel like somebody's in one fighter's in another fighter's head. Everybody kind of, and look, you won't find it now, but I remember the clip when Jorge Masvidal started talking about Ben Askren for the first time, and in that clip, all you heard in the comments was how much Askren is in Masvidal's head, how he's got him shook. Quickest knockout in UFC history by Jorge Masvidal. Why? Because ultimately, those mind games don't matter. What matters is what happens in the fight. And this is something that people got to realise. The mental side of fighting is very, very important. I am not saying that it's not, but it is vastly overrated in my opinion. And don't get me wrong, you have a fighter who's shook, it's going to show on the night. But more often than not, at the level that the likes of Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira are looking at and competing at, you aren't gonna. I just don't think that affects them as much. You got to that point already. There isn't any mental demons to me that really affects a fighter in high level MMA. The only time I've ever seen a fighter mentally shook and that affected his performance was Jose Aldo against Conor McGregor. Every other fight from that point, I've never seen it. In boxing, it's the same. So boxing is less so actually, even though there is so much hyperbole about how important the mind is, how fighters have to be prepared in the night. I've never even seen a fighter really, I felt in my time, that old mentally just, I don't know, like just shook in the ring to the point where it affected their performance. Now, there are some examples that perhaps I feel a fighter, you could blame the mind, but I don't really look at it overly deep like that. I always look at what they could have done better in the fight. I look at Lyndon Arthur and Anthony Yarde as an example. A lot of people felt like Lyndon Arthur was just not with it that night, and his head was somewhere else, and that's why he lost and got, I forget what round he got stopped in, but why he got stopped in the fight. I don't really look at that overly deeply, but I feel like it's certainly a factor. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to use, I believe it's 5 examples I have here from the world of mixed martial arts and boxing, and 5 examples of fans over-analysing a fighter's body language and trying to almost make conclusions off of that. And it's the first one that I just mentioned I want to start off with. This past weekend, Adesanya and Pereira. The whole fight week, Adesanya's body language over-analysed. So I'm going to look at 2 instances with Israel Adesanya. First thing, as we know, they do media week press conferences where fighters will obviously talk about what the feelings of the fight. It's just one fighter at a time, and they'll talk about the feelings, the thoughts, what they feel for the fight. And obviously, Israel Adesanya, quite a what would be the word? An outspoken character, and sometimes I think people, because he's like that, people often like to make conclusions just off how he acts, and it isn't exactly accurate for me. So, first thing to note, obviously a lot of the comments kind of noticed how Adesanya has a thing of being, to a lot of people, being cringy. To me, I don't really look him. I mean, alright, the dog collar thing was a bit weird, and the Elsa line, I question. But most of the things, I think I can kind of see a lot of times where Adesanya does come from with a lot of the stuff. I just think it doesn't sometimes come across very well to the general public, but I don't really care about what he says. I just care about him as a fighter, and he's excellent. However, there is one comment here that does talk about how motivated Izzy looked and how confident he was, and it's a humorous comment, because at the end it says Alex by KO, because his suggestion is obviously he could do everything right, but Pereira's still going to knock him out, which is what I said in my video, which I felt could still happen. But there is a comment below it, and I think this sort of shows what I'm talking about how nervous he is, and not just a little bit, how he's super, super nervous, and how Pereira is just living in the moment, wants to win, if he doesn't, whatever. And I think this is just what I'm talking about. There's the nerves almost play into, I feel, how people, and the body language is almost how people will kind of, in their own minds, predict how a fight's going to happen. Because a fighter looks nervous, or he looks a little bit out of focus, it will often be that people will look at this and really delve into it. It is so irrelevant, I think, to how this looks. And it was showed that it's relevant because Adesanya knocked Pereira into another realm in the fight. It wasn't nervous in the fight, obviously. He actually was super confident. And when I saw his walkout, that's when I saw that this guy, he was ready. And I just, I often say, I think people go way too, you just go way too far with this stuff. So that's the first example. Pereira, Adesanya. He was so nervous, he looked shook, but yet he still knocked him out. What are you going to do? Second example. Anthony Joshua, Andy Ruiz 2. Now, Anthony Joshua and Andy Ruiz. This is a difficult one per se. 3 years ago this was. So it's kind of hard to sometimes find all the comments that were from 3 years ago. A lot of it was how he's humble, how both guys were humble and whatever. But there's one comment which I think kind of highlights what I was talking about. Talking about how everybody is a self-accredited sports psychologist who talks about Joshua being fearful and knowing that he's already lost. And you saw so much of this, and I saw so much of this in the build-up to the fight, of how Joshua looked shook. He wasn't the same. I said it before, Anthony Joshua's loss to Andy Ruiz, in my opinion, was overanalyzed to hell. It was so... I felt people just will cling on to anything. And this is why I often... Don't get me wrong, I understand criticisms of fighters stylistically and maybe personality-wise. Some people do live vicariously through other fighters, and I feel like it's a weird complex that people have. But regardless, I don't really like to bash Anthony Joshua for this reason, because it feels like he gets bashed regardless. So, and with Anthony Joshua, because he's was a very respectful, humble guy. I mean, he still is, but because he has this image of one, when he lost, everybody powdered on him and said that he was, scared of Andy Ruiz, and saying that he mentally he looked gone, and how he was just lost in there, didn't look like he knew what to do, and that was going to come into the second fight. There's nothing you can do. The demons are there. Everything. Was the second fight entertaining? No. But Anthony Joshua beat Andy Ruiz that fight. He beat him over 12 rounds and barely broke a sweat. Did Ruiz come in out of shape? Yes. That's not Anthony Joshua's problem. But it showed you those mental things did not matter in the fight. The mental part of fighting is important. I've often said, I'm not saying that it's not, but it is. People love to cling on to it. It does not matter. Ultimately, what matters is on the night, can you perform? That is it. It doesn't matter if you're nervous, if you look shook, whatever. The signs might be there, but ultimately they are irrelevant. It is the performance, the skill of a fighter that matters. If you have a fighter who has a poor chin against a knockout artist, a fighter may look a little bit shook. Maybe the guy with a poor chin looks all scared and shook up because he's fighting a dangerous guy. And when he'll fight a guy, and maybe let's just say he comes into this fight, he gets knocked out by this pretend said fighter who has knockout power, and people will look at that and be like, oh look, he was scared before the fight, that's why he lost. They won't actually look at the fact that maybe he just made a mistake in the fight, or maybe stylistically it wasn't a good matchup for him. There's so much stuff there. But again, I really do not understand this mentality of fight fans sometimes. So that was one. Now the third example. Now this one I give some leeway to fight fans in this sense, because in hindsight, looking at it, it would seem like said one fighter did mentally get the better of another fighter, and that was Dominic Cruz, Cody Garbrandt, all the way back in 2016. If you remember, before the fight, Cody Garbrandt and Cruz were going back and forth, and Cody Garbrandt was one of my favourite fighters. I still like him. Not just me, he was everybody's. And Dominic Cruz, masterful trash talker. And if you remember, they were constantly going back and forth. But in the, what would be the correct terminology? In the communications department, I'd say. Or whatever. Cruz is just a very good speaker. And Garbrandt isn't. He's more of a, what you think of a fighter, someone who just doesn't talk but he fights. However, Cruz really did. It felt like Cruz almost got the better of him, and one thing I did find, and this is the one fight that kind of showed me about this trash talking stuff. It doesn't matter what happened when Dominic Cruz fought Cody Garbrandt. Cody Garbrandt put on an all-time performance for himself and in the bantamweight division, and absolutely schooled and dominated Dominic Cruz. If you remember the fight, the first round was a lot closer than people think, but then from almost the second round onwards, it was just a one-sided beatdown. Garbrandt was mocking him, knocked him down like 3 times, if I remember correctly, or twice. He was breakdancing in the octagon, like it was so easy for him, and it was crazy considering what happened before, and it showed. It's irrelevant what happens. And if you look at the comments, and again, 2016, so you don't have to go back. There was one here about talking about how great Cruz's trash talking was, which it is. And we talk about how his trash talking didn't really work on Uriah, or did work with Uriah. But how it works great on TJ Dillashaw. This was something that, again, I think is once again overstated. Did it work great on TJ as mentally getting mad? Possibly, but did it have an effect on the fight? I just don't think so. Stylistically is what it is, and I just I don't know, I just don't think it matters. A lot of the time the trash talking aspect is big, but to me it is not as big as what it is. It's really so irrelevant. And if you look at a lot of the comments going back, comments about how Cruz had him on lock in the trash talk, and how it's he made a comment about Cody Garbrandt's girlfriend, saying keeping your fling on the string, which I think really got Garbrandt mad. Here he was talking about how Cody had hooked himself so he could go back and cry, just talking about how Cruz owned him and how he got emotional and all this kind of stuff. In the end, did it matter? No, because Garbrandt beat him from pillar to post, and it was comfortable in the end for him. Doesn't matter. Like I said, it overrated this aspect of fighting, but people will always cling on to it. Now, we go in to my fourth example, and this one was, and it's a funny one. This one, considering the two fighters it contains. Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz at UFC 202, which was the second fight they had. Now, Obviously, McGregor lost to Diaz the first time round. A lot of trash talking. We know how Conor McGregor operates. And coming into this fight, he was a lot more calmer. But if we go to the comments on the press conference for the UFC 202, and if you go back, so 6 years ago was when the when the fight was. So you have to go searching for these comments a little bit, because obviously they're not going to be all up to date, and especially for a a classic like this, it's never going to be all recent. Especially, we know how people don't like being proved wrong, so they delete comments and what have you. And if you see here, so he essentially, so one comment talks here about how it was brilliant from Nate because he gave Conor a taste of his own medicine, and it was saying what he did to all people. This one was a good one. The slow destruction of Conor's confidence by Diaz brothers is a fantastic viewing. Destroyed his confidence. That's a funny thing, because in the fight he seemed to win a decision over 5 rounds, which Conor never does because his cardio is a well-known problem. At 170, knocked him down twice. It didn't seem to be an issue there. And then if you look at this comment, Diaz killing him psychologically, watching him walk off before he puts his scripted lines. This just shows you. I don't. It just doesn't matter, people, but it really doesn't. And the amount of times I see people bringing this aspect of martial arts, boxing up, of the trash talking and how it gets into people's skin, and that means they're not going to perform well on the night. I don't think a fighter is going to go. I don't think Conor went into the fight thinking of that time, the press conference where he didn't show up. He was focused, or not when he didn't show up, but when Nate walked out, he was focused purely on the guy in front of him. I think fighters, there's two different sort of forms. It's the sort of pre-fight version of themselves, and then it's the fight week and then the fight night version of themselves. You notice a lot of fighters are very calm before fights. 3-4 months out from a fight, they'll be relaxed. Fight week, Deontay Wilder's a good example of this. They will be amped up, and fight night, they're locked in. They don't care about what was said before. It's just about the now, and that's what Adesanya said in his press conference with Pereira. It didn't matter about what happened before, what he said. It's about now. Focus on him now. And that is exactly what people really need to take away from this, because it's just, again, it is such a bigged up part by fans. It feels like they're all body language experts, and they because he's making a little movement here, a little movement there, that means he's so mentally shook. It is so irrelevant. I can't even begin to explain this to you. But this is one example. Now, the last example I'm going to use, and this part, when I say this, I swear I mean this. I'm saying this with all due respect, and I mean this at the highest point, because this said person is one of the most knowledgeable people in boxing, and is someone who's respected as well, not just in boxing, but now in mixed martial arts as the sport has grown. And that's Teddy Atlas. Now, I remember this at the time, and I remember thinking, this is almost a prime example to me of what I mean by when I say people overanalyze words from fighters and body language and little, I don't know, just when a fighter does something, it almost gets so overanalyzed, and people feel like if a fighter looks a little bit nervous, that means they've lost the fight. If a fighter doesn't do something, it means psychologically they're gone. So many of these things just annoy me, and this is big. So this is all the way back in 2020 when Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury fought for the second time. And Teddy Atlas tweeted after the weigh-ins of the fight. No, in the weigh-ins, Fury didn't remove his shirt. It was just him with his, I think, his Gypsy King sort of vest on. And Teddy Atlas, after weigh-in, tweeted two things. He says, first one, I've been saying on ESPN that something's wrong with Fury's psychology. He now weighs 273, and I don't want to hear how it's part of the plan. How did that work for Ruiz? I believe it's a sign of where he mentally is lost. Second tweet. When does a fighter not remove a shirt at a weigh-in? When he's not in the proper form. You cannot consciously do that, then say, I put on the weight to help me. Then why hide it? With a question mark. All due respect, I've never seen a tweets age so badly. First of all, he's saying to 273 and how it's not part of his plan. How did that work for Ruiz? We saw how it worked part of his plan. This man leaned and absolutely bullied Deontay Wilder on the night in one of the most destructive heavyweight fights I've ever seen. Deontay Wilder is a brilliant fighter, and destructive. He got bullied by Tyson Fury. Why? Because Fury put on the weight. It makes sense. Andy Ruiz. The reason Andy Ruiz weighs so much, and I mean this in a respectful way because I do like Andy Ruiz, but it was because he got lost in his own sort of Kool-Aid. He did what Buster Douglas did. He won the one fight and thought he made it. You saw him buying all those different cars, going on talk shows. It all went to his head. He admitted it. His trainers admitted it. Everybody around him sort of could see it. And the last line of where Teddy Atlas says in this first tweet about how he believes it's a sign of where he mentally is lost. He was anything but mentally lost on the night. Now, him not removing his shirt at the weigh-in is so irrelevant. Why does it matter if he doesn't want to remove it? Tyson Fury is just, I don't know. Fury does what he does. I don't think people can really predict or analyze what Tyson Fury does, why he does it. He's just one of those people, and I don't understand why this is so, and Teddy Atlas is someone who really does big up the mental side of boxing, and he, in his mind, because I think he worked with Mike Tyson, and Mike Tyson was someone who's such a complicated character in boxing, somebody who was bullied as a kid, someone who was a genetic and physical freak, and someone who ended up becoming a world champion but then lost his father figure in Cus D'Amato and then couldn't really get back on the right path. I think maybe this is where his approach comes from, and his approach is correct. A lot of the time, mentally, it's very important for fighters, and with Anthony Joshua as an example, somebody who seems to have lost his way a little bit. So mentally, again, that side of the game is very important, but I just think it's so irrelevant. I don't ever look at a fighter mentally on the night and think, okay, this is why they're going to lose. I only ever once did that, and it was actually for the Adesanya Pereira fight, but I didn't analyze it at the moment. I didn't look at Adesanya's press conference and think, okay, now he's going to lose because he's mentally shook up. I looked at it because the man lost 3 times to the same guy and thought, can he come back from that? And he showed he can. But I never ever am 100% confident if a fighter is nervous or not, because how many times has a fighter looked nervous and in the beforehand and in the fight they've looked amazing? He says here how he thinks sign of where he is mentally lost for Fury. Fury was anything but mentally lost in that fight. He came in there, marched Deontay Wilder down and put a beating on him. That is the exact opposite of that, and this just shows, like, I understand people like to talk about the trash talking aspect of this game and mentally how fighters look, and because it's such a intense thing, stepping in there in the octagon, in the ring on a big night when you're competing in these big fights, I understand why it's a very big part of fighting. But ultimately, my point and takeaway from this is, people, we're not psychologists, we're not body language experts, we're just fans. Don't need to analyze everything. Now in Teddy Atlas's case, he's very experienced, he talks about this a lot, and I will listen to him, but I just feel like, look at the tweets, they're over-analysed. You don't need to analyse every little thing. Not everything means something. Some things, Fury not taking a shot from the win does not mean that he's mentally lost. It maybe just means that he just didn't want to take his shit off. It's just that simple. It's not that deep. You don't need to over-analyse every little thing. And I think this is a big part of fighting, and I think it's an issue with a lot of people. They like to make conclusions off of this, and so many people made videos of Adesanya looking lost and what have you, and that's why he's going to lose to Pereira, and everybody was so sure he was going to lose. I thought he would lose Adesanya, but not because of him looking mentally lost, because of the fights before and the stylistic matchup. I look at, and maybe this is why I view things differently to other fight fans. Fight fans support fighters at times because of their personality, because of, obviously the skill set's important, but it feels like sometimes people root for fighters because of the character and where they come from. I don't. I root for fighters if I like what I see. In boxing, I can give you a list of my favorite fighters. I like Errol Spence. I like Boots Ennis. I like Shakur Stevenson. All of these guys, none of them come from the UK, by the way, which is where I'm from. They're all American, but I like the skill set. I like what I see, and I think their personality doesn't matter to me. I like Errol Spence's personality more, so I'd say he's quite a composed and relaxed individual, and he's not really vocal. And Boots Ennis, the same with Shakur Stevenson. None of these guys are vocal. Usyk, one of my favourite fighters as well. Doesn't really say he's a character Usyk, but he's not really outgoing like this. And same with Canelo and others. And in mixed martial arts, I really liked. I love John Jones. Now I'd have to see John Jones more to see if I would still rank him as my favourite fighter. But I know it's liked him because of what he did in the octagon, not because of who he is and what he's doing. If I was ranking him on personality, he'd be bottom of the list because of obvious things that's happened outside the octagon. If we're judging fighters on their personalities, a lot of people don't like Kamaru Usman. I don't know why people don't like Usman. I don't really see people say he's cringy and he's fake, but it's not as if he's hurting anybody. He's what he is. Same with Adesanya. A lot of people don't like Adesanya, and a lot of them don't like him even more after his celebration mocking Pereira's kid, which, like I said, the game is the game. But again, I don't judge them for their personality. I judge them on their fight, and I think because people play so much into this, they like the personalities, the stories. They will often, when it comes to the things that almost are non-fighting, such as the verbal and mental warfare, that is something that I think they will constantly big up and really use to to sort of, form their opinion because they judge it and value it so highly. To me, I value the style of fighting. I'm a purist. I like seeing how fighters match up with each other. I don't really care about anything else other than that. And don't get me wrong, it's fun when you see two personalities like when Floyd Conor back in the day. I wanted to see that fight, not because of the fight, I just wanted to see it because of how those two would go at each other. And it was entertaining, I won't lie, it was. If I want to see characters match up, then I think you go to WWE. To me, I like the stylistic matchups. I get people, again, I don't blame people for wanting action, entertainment. A fight is much better, I will admit, when there's personal angst between the two fighters. But when it comes into how people kind of perceive fighters, and that almost becomes a lot of fighters, who they are is essentially the opinion of the fans and their image. And I think when people don't like a fighter, if a fighter shows any kind of weakness, maybe he looks a little bit nervous, people will take that and run with it and say, okay, this is why they're losing, they're never going to be the same fighter again, retire, pack up the gloves, you're not going anywhere. Not the case. Fighting is not as deep as that. Mentally, like I said, very, very important, the fight game, to step in there and go punch, kick a man, and almost inadvertently sort of risking your life in there. You need a lot of character to do that, but when you're at a certain level, I think it becomes vastly inferior to the other aspects of fighting. But yeah, just my thoughts though on this whole body language experts that exist in boxing and mixed martial arts. It doesn't matter. People need to stop overanalyzing these things. Just look at the fighters for who they are. I don't think you should almost overanalyze everything. I don't think everything needs to be overanalyzed. To me, fighting is relatively logical. There's not many matchups in boxing, for example, where I've been completely shocked about the results. Same in mixed martial arts. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I'm right. I wasn't right this for the Adesanya Pereira, but I do believe that sometimes people will almost look at fighters who they want to win, and they will use any sort of mental sign from neither fighter to say, oh, this is why they're definitely going to win, and this is why this fight should retire. He's mentally not the same, he's shook, and all this kind of stuff. So it doesn't matter. But yeah, just my thoughts on that. These body language experts that exist in both of these sports, we need to relax, and we just need to judge these fights correctly, in my opinion. But yeah, Till next time.